We are very close to the end of a very unusual election season, which means these folks who I'm sitting with are at the end of a very arduous endorsement season. Welcome to the Opinion Show, a special edition that we're calling the Endorsement Show. It's when the editorial board will discuss some of the decisions that went into the endorsement process this year. I am here today with Betsy Sullivan, our opinion director, and editorial writers Pete Krouse, Chris Evans, and Sharron Brussard. We're going to talk today about the various endorsement interviews that have been done and how the selections were made. So let's get right into it. Let's start with the governor. We have the incumbent John Kasich, the challenger Ed Fitzgerald, and the Green Party candidate Anita Rios. The editorial board endorsed John Kasich. What's the thinking there?
Well, I do want to preface this by saying that one of the things that made this endorsement season so unusual was the refusal by virtually all of the statewide executive elected officials to incumbents to debate their opponents. So this kind of made our endorsement interviews take on a different kind of tenor. And you know, we did actually have that interview was particularly interesting because of the fact that Ed Fitzgerald came kind of primed for bear. He was really on the attack the whole time. But we're not just basing our decision on the endorsement interview. We were looking at the governor's record and really feeling that he had actually delivered in a way that was not strictly partisan, that kept in mind the interests of Northeast Ohio and of Cleveland in particular, that he had gone against his own party in some key ways on Medicaid expansion and in other ways, that he was, and showed that through a veto, determined to protect Lake Erie, which is an incredibly important issue to us and to our readers. So that's, to summarize how we felt about it.
It wasn't an easy decision because at the same time, the governor has taken I would say, a cheerleading role in terms of expanding gun rights. I mean, he signed into law a bill that allows you to bring guns into museums and sporting events and bars, which is insane. And he also supports defunding Planned Parenthood and has launched other attacks on women's rights that are offensive, and I don't know that they're a good thing.
Sharron, part of the decision here was based on the weakness of the candidacy of Ed Fitzgerald. Do you think the discussion would have been greatly different if a strong Democratic candidate existed in this race?
Yes, because then I think it would have been more focused on the issues and less on the character of the Democratic opponent, Ed Fitzgerald, who was so fatally flawed. I think by the time it came for us to endorse that, it was pretty clear that, he was not up to the challenge of becoming the next governor.
So if we had the debate about women's issues and some of the things Chris said, people might have felt differently, that a
Yes.
challenger might have been better placed.
Right, but even at that endorsement interview, I mean, Ed didn't talk about issues. I mean, he just, like Betsy said, he came loaded for bear. I mean, he was just barking at Kasich.
Well, he brought up some issues. He brought up reproductive rights and especially the inability for rape crisis.
Actually, that was Anita Rios.
That was Anita Rios.
He followed up on it.
What I hear him say is what he would do about those issues. I got a pretty general sense of what he would do about, abortion and that kind of thing, but I did not get a sense of what he was going to do about algal blooms or other issues.
All right. Well, Ed did drill home that point about the inability for rape crisis.
Yes, he did.
The gag.
So anyway,
that
wasn't Anita, but
you're never wrong, are you?
Rarely.
I don't remember that.
No, but the one thing I wanted to say about Kasich, again, is that I didn't like the fact that he'd watered down the renewable energy mandates, and that bothered me a lot. But still, I think Ed tried to press the issues with the governor, but the governor knew he was so far ahead, and so it became game.
I think it is important to put in perspective. One of the reasons that endorsements matter and are important is it is our regions, our news organization's statement of what is important to us, to our readers, to our region, to our city. And I think we are able to convey that message to the governor through the endorsement, through the questions that we asked, which we really drilled into the renewable energy issue. We drilled into the women's rights issues, some of the things that we have disagreed with him about. But in the end, it is a matter of balancing. You know, overall, he has been actually a good governor for this part of the state, as well as for all of Ohioans.
Well,
was our
none of us
conclusion.
expected him to be somebody that did go against his party and would work with a Frank Jackson. That was the surprise. And he also, look, he showed the humility that you would hope for when he had his head handed to him on SB 5 and right to work. He didn't come right back and say, well, we're going to try again. He said, okay, people have spoken, I got other things to do.
But also,
Right, but he
Chris,
never-
but the biggest issue of the campaign was jobs and the economy. And Kasich was able to ride a resurgent economy to a certain extent. And Ed Fitzgerald has spent a lot of time trying to dismiss the governor's policies and their role in bringing these jobs back when he can't prove it, that they didn't play a role, and Kasich can't prove that he did play a role. So it was one of these issues that, well, you know what, the governor just gets credit for when the jobs come back. He gets blamed for when the jobs go away.
Okay, let's move on. The Attorney General's race features Mike DeWine, the incumbent, running against Democrat David Pepper. In that endorsement interview, we had quite a bit of animation one time.
It was peppery.
Slams the table because he couldn't finish a sentence. The feeling generally was, as I recall from the discussion, Mike DeWine generally has done a pretty good job as a
I would
General.
say, I would couch it, I wouldn't say generally, I'd be stronger than that. I think the Rape Kit initiative is truly revolutionary. I mean, he has taken a step, and it wasn't that Cordray, his predecessor, didn't pay attention to this, but I mean, DeWine has really made that a priority, and it's resulted in just, you know, the cold cases, the people that have been arrested as a result of it, and it's heightened awareness of rape survivors and the resources that are available to them, and I mean, he's really led the parade on that, and I think that's a significant. That's a significant.
But the
event.
job is about more than one issue. I mean,
Right.
you that's a big issue with you, but there have been a lot of things he's been involved in. He took a bit more of a lead than the mayor of Cleveland would have liked in the
Yes.
in the police
Right,
chase.
right.
I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think anybody expected him to be quite the law and order.
I agree.
attorney
Well,
general.
and
Yeah.
he really assisted Tim McGinty when it came to driving out the internet cafe businesses in town. You know, DeWine put a lot of resources into that. He was very supportive from a legal standpoint, and you know that McGinty was correct in what he was trying to do. So that was, and I don't hear too many people complaining about that. I think DeWine was on the right
But
side
Betsy,
of
we
that.
are troubled a little bit by his advocacy for issues in other states.
We definitely are, and that, you know, again, I think is, again, the virtue of the endorsement, where we did not endorse Mike DeWine 4 years ago. We did endorse him for this election because of the job we think he's done. It is, you know, but we chided him for expressing through his friend of the court briefs his personal political views as opposed to representing the state, and that is simply wrong. And the endorsement interview also happened on a news day when news was breaking relative to him, so we were able to really express our dubiousness about his explanation for why he did not make the videotape public in the Walmart shooting case down in Beaver Creek, where he's from.
Right.
So.
I tried
And
to
that
make
was
a public
very-
records argument. There was
the public
I
records
think
argument was
he can
bad,
make an
yes.
argument for why he did that, though, because you know, we've just gone through Ferguson, and I think he wanted to prevent any kind of protest or outrage that video may have.
But our
But it's a public
in
record.
favor of public records.
Right.
You can't change the records law to accommodate your whim.
And
It's
also the
flat out
reason,
illegal.
you could argue that the reason why Ferguson blew up was that a lack of transparency, a sense that, you know, people in the streets and their family members were not getting all the information, so that way, you know, you get a better sense of what was going on.
That was, you know, an endorsement interview where two lawyers were going at each other, and it was probably the most animated and adversarial of all of the endorsement interviews we did. But my favorite visual from that was where David Pepper came in with two briefing books that were, you know, indexed and typed up, and And there was Mike DeWine with his handwritten legal pad, with all of his thoughts that he wanted to put on the record for us. And it really, to me, that was a big contrast between those two people.
Right.
Quick thought about David Pepper?
Very aggressive. He was like a hunting dog,
ready to
waiting
go.
for his master to go.
He wasn't going to let DeWine finish. But the thing I'm left with Pepper is, I mean, you look at a guy like DeWine. I mean, he's like been in politics his whole life. I mean, he's been in the state legislature. He's been in Congress. Now he's here. Pepper's like a young pup. It's like you're going to go after a guy who's been in the ring for how many years, and you're going to try to get
But we're going to
Bark at him.
again.
Pepper had some
He's-
experience. He was on the
Yeah.
Cincinnati council. I
Big
think.
deal.
He was, in fact, I think he served with DeWine's son, did he not?
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's when you got this kind
Seasoned
of thick.
pro.
Yeah. I mean, it's yes.
My favorite interview was the next one we're going to talk about with Secretary of State John Husted, the incumbent, Nina Turner, the Democratic challenger, Kevin Nedler, the Libertarian who's running. It seemed to me that Turner and Husted both came in loaded with very strong debate skills, with a lot of ammunition, and just were formidable opponents. In the end, it was really the only endorsement interview he did that was pretty much single issue. The last
That's
5
right.
minutes
Yeah, all
danced
about
away,
elections.
but this became voting rights, and in the end, that was why the endorsement went to Nina Turner.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, they, you had Husted standing pat on blanket rules and how every county should be treated the same. You had Nina on the other side, Turner, talking about why, different communities should be treated differently, what had been the history of their voting here in Ohio, particularly the long lines that they had, a number of years ago in Cleveland that, got national attention. And they went head to head, and I think in the end you had to say, like, they would both be really good, I think, as Secretary of State, considering all that person seems to do these days that people care about are, voting rights and voting rules.
And Betsy, normally we don't think of these as single issue races because the Secretary of State has so many more responsibilities than just voting. But in this case, we did fall on a single issue. What's the thinking there?
Well, I think it's because it is actually all wrapped up in the fact that we've been critical before about the partisanship of the Secretary of State's office when that person, and both Democrats and Republicans, when that person is the chief elections officer in the state, it has been a problem. It has helped erode confidence in the integrity of our voting laws, I believe, because depending on who controls the legislature, we have, this kind of ping pong effect. Who's ever in control enacts rules and laws that will penalize the other party, and that simply undermines confidence that we're that these fundamental rights, these constitutional rights of access to the franchise are being imperiled. Now, we did give full credit to Husted in our endorsement editorial for all of his achievements. Apart from that, he has been from a manager, an extremely effective Secretary of State, and we at the same time also raised a few red flags about Nina Turner's partisanship and hoping that she would in fact not carry forth this tradition of partisan Secretary of State. She has asserted that it will be all about voting rights and individual rights and not about party rights and partisan rights. If she's elected, we hope that she will.
Yeah, we do have reservations
Yeah.
that she will
Yeah.
not be partisan the way we found John
Yeah.
Husted to be
Yeah.
partisan.
Yeah.
Was anybody surprised at the vigor of that debate? Or was
No,
it-
I've talked to Nina Turner before, and John Husted has come here many times, and no, I'm not surprised by that. I will say I think that going back to the Fitzgerald thing, that's what makes this whole situation shameful, because I kind of fear that when people kind of take a look at the top race and like, oh, there's nothing going on there, because we know about this guy's flaws, and then they look down ticket, they're like, well, not going to vote for any of these dumps. It might taint, I think, the entire ballot. So.
But weren't you impressed with Husted? I mean, I have to say that
No, I always
he
have
walked
been.
into the Lion's Den knowing our
Yes.
position, which we'd editorialized about repeatedly over a number of years, very critical of his position on, especially this uniformity issue with Cuyahoga County, where he's gone head to head, with Ed Fitzgerald in the past over this, and he has been on the wrong side of that, I firmly believe. he completely held his own.
Yeah.
And I thought Nina Turner was also surprisingly
Yeah.
good and effective at countering his arguments.
It was the most substantial debate, I think, endorsement interview that we had. I just got to say, though, the whole voting rights, or not voting rights, but early voting, to me, I still don't know how much difference it would make, whether you have 4 weeks or 5 weeks or
Right,
6 weeks
but-
or all that.
That's the pragmatic approach.
Yeah.
I think we, in the end, we're discussing it based on principle. I think we'll see
Well-
Houston again in 4 years. I expect he'll be running hard for governor. What about Mr. Nedler? He's another single-issue guy. He wants recognition of the minor parties and
Yeah.
was very frustrated, well-meaning, but just didn't seem to have the depth.
On the other hand, I think though he was completely and admittedly a single issue guy, he did raise what I think is a pertinent point, which is that the state has wasted money essentially fighting battles to keep third parties off the ticket. And this year, that was particularly notable because Governor Kasich did not want a libertarian challenging him for governor because it would siphon more conservative votes away from him. So there was, to my mind, all sorts of games being played, both in the governor's office and I think that this, and in the legislature. And I think that this is something that again, if we're all about access to the franchise and allowing people to feel like their voice is being heard in the electoral process, and a point that Anita Rios made as well from the Green Party perspective, we do have to be a state that's more welcoming and allows third parties to get on the ballot.
Okay, next up, the treasurer's race. Josh Mandel, the incumbent, versus Connie Pillage. Josh Mandel comes in very, very clearly saying, I've run this office very well. He cleaned up some corruption that existed before he got there, and things are running very well. But we did not endorse him. What's the thought process there?
Well, I mean, he in fact, I think was taken by surprise at how intensively we bore in on the Ben Suarez case, where his explanations simply don't add up, if you will. They don't seem to be consistent one with the other, where he claims complete amnesia about why he wrote this letter and whether he's ever acted in a similar way for any other constituent who might not have put together a little bonus package of $100,000 for his Senate campaign.
In this case, he writes a letter for somebody who's in legal trouble, trying to get him out of legal trouble in California, and lots of money comes in from the employees of that company. There were charges against Ben Suarez. Largely, he was cleared of them, but it did reveal some connections there with Josh Mandel. And in that endorsement interview, that probably took up half the time asking him those questions, and he just kept using his same talking points.
The other element of our thinking is that actually the Treasurer's Office is one of those that kind of runs itself. Tom Suttis had a column this past Sunday that basically said that maybe this shouldn't even be an elected position, because it's sort of like, Josh Mandel is taking credit for what the budget director is actually doing. Actually, from what I understand, he's taking credit for maybe one tiny phrase in our endorsement editorial in one of his ads, even though we strongly endorsed his opponent, Connie Pillage.
Yes.
Well, and he took credit for, the credit rating of the state improving, and that, from what I understand, wasn't based on anything he did at all. But I think the thing with Josh is I think he feels like the editorial boards of the papers that hit him hard on Ben Suarez are not in step with the public. And so I think he just, he can tell us whatever he wants because he doesn't think the public cares.
But you got to give him credit. He knew he was walking into the lion's den, and he took the questions. But in the end, this is kind of like the governor's race, where the integrity question is
Absolutely.
paramount, and then everything else is secondary.
Right.
That's what the voters appear to have decided in the governor's race. It's what the editorial board decided in the Mandel-Pillage race. What do we think about Connie Pillage?
I don't know. We actually were hammering so much Mandel. I'm not sure. I thought that she was a strong enough candidate. I mean, she didn't kind of leap into the fray often enough. Sometimes she seemed a little bit like a bystander as we were, asking questions to him, and didn't kind of put in like, well, what she would do. But
Well, we were hammering away pretty well at him.
Yeah, she didn't
I think
have
she
to
just
say
wanted to
anything.
sit back and let us do the
Right.
do the dirty work. But I think she was. I was impressed by her. Her credentials, her education. The years she spent in the Air Force. Politically, she obviously is pretty astute. She's able to hold on to a seat down there that's pretty conservative. And I think she's got the smarts. I'm sure she can do this job. I have no doubt that she can do this job.
And she did ultimately, even though she tripped at first, promise to serve the full term, whereas Josh would not. Josh, as soon as he won his first term, was running for U.S. Senate. He would not make that promise this time.
Well, that was some honesty on Josh's point, since he's usually looking for the next position, so be honest.
The auditor's race, Dave Yost versus John Patrick Carney. What's the thinking there?
Slam dunk.
Okay, well,
I think Yost, I mean, the thing that impressed me most about Yost was that he went, one of the big issues I have with the Kasich administration is Jobs Ohio. And, you know, Yost is the only one who stood up to the party and tried to get in there and find out exactly where this money was going, you know, try to provide some kind of oversight and accountability to the public.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that Yost has been on top of the charter school situation. I mean, he is always auditing them and then, you know, bringing up red flag cases. He had talked to me in the past about even, you know, talking to legislators about some kind of legislation to make sure that some of the common problems that keep coming up with people basically stealing money from kids and from the state do not happen again. So you know, he's a Republican, and usually they're really in favor and don't see anything wrong with charter schools, but, you know, he does.
And his Yost commercial is the best one out there. It's the most palatable.
Yost.
You know.
so that's what
That's my wife.
Yeah, right.
No reservations on Yost. It's
None.
No, I don't know. And we didn't endorse him the last time around.
4 years ago, when it was an open seat, we actually endorsed Pepper
Right.
for that seat,
Right.
ironically.
Ironically.
But
He was
you know,
better behaved.
we have to give him credit for the fact that he went and debated with John Patrick Carney in this election. He was the only one of the 5 statewide executive elected officials to do that, to agree to that. And Carney, while he was very, you know, again, the lawyer with the briefing papers and very, you know, he stayed on message and so on, certainly conveyed to us this idea that he would be a more partisan auditor of state. And this is something that, you know, I think the Jobs Ohio was indicative of, that Yost has never left that impression, that he does not audit based on partisan politics, but based on, you know, the interests of the taxpayer.
No, the day he was here, he actually put out an opinion about a Republican mayor in
Right.
Beechwood saying he's collecting fees for marrying people. That's illegal.
And he's a
Yeah,
big
I
promoter
wanna
of
get into
shared
that.
services too, to the
Right.
extent that he
That's
can do
right.
that from his,
Yeah.
from, you know, from his office. And that's going to grow, I think. That's going to become a more.
It's nice to have one where it's just a resounding
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
yes
that
for-
was,
for
yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to the Congress, the Ohio 14th. We have David Joyce, the incumbent, running against Michael Wager, the Democrat, and the Libertarian David Macco, who has some very unusual
Well,
ideas.
yeah,
as we
but
came
David
to
was a
learn.
lot of fun. And he, you know, I mean, he knew exactly where he stood on every issue.
But we had a hard time on this one.
Well,
had a
we
long
disagreed.
spirited debate on
Right.
where to go with this. This
I
was
agree.
not the resounding endorsement.
Right.
Ultimately, the endorsement went to the incumbent David Joyce, but it was, we're giving it to you, but we expect you to do all sorts of things you haven't done, and if you don't, we probably won't support you next time.
Well, I think the thing with Joyce is that he has proven himself to be an advocate and a steward for Lake Erie. He's carrying on the legacy of Steve LaTourette. But the problem with Dave is, I don't know if we got into the editorial or not, but you know, it's time to put on the big boy pants. I mean, he needs to really step up and take more of a leadership role in Congress.
Well, let's talk about what we were troubled by, the guns. He would not.
Well, the NRA thing, yeah, don't get me started. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm getting you started.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's, you know, particularly for his congressional district. I mean, I think there is no way, and he never really answered this question, and Wager went after him for it. I mean, he is obligated to the NRA. I mean, he might not be doing ads for them and stuff like that, but I mean, he's their guy.
And he would not state his
But
position.
he's a
wouldn't
former
state his-
prosecutor. You know, he should know the
Well, he said, I'm the only one in Congress that's prosecuted a school shooting case, and he still won't state his position
Right.
on background checks.
Background checks, right.
Yeah.
It seemed in that endorsement interview too, he was lethargic, whereas Wager had a lot of energy, but our fear in discussing him is that he would be far too partisan and would not work well with others, which
Right.
really is kind of
Which is one of
issue right
Joyce's, which is
Yeah.
one of Joyce's strengths. I think he does reach across the island, and there is a lot of bipartisanship in the stuff that he's accomplished. That was my feeling with Wager, was that, you know, he was going to go in and he was not going to look for consensus. He was.
But he's a smart guy who
Smart
has
guy.
clearly stated positions where Joyce would not answer questions. He stepped up. He says, I answered fully. Universal background checks.
Hell
yes."
yeah.
There were a
Right.
number of times where he kind of chided us, saying, make him answer. He's not answering the question. Make him answer. And
Right.
he was quite insistent. And then David Macko was.
Well, yeah, I mean, God bless David Macko. I thought he was to the point. He didn't sugarcoat anything, and I think when we were talking about immigration reform, you know, he had one of the best answers we've heard, which is he referred to Operation Wetback 2.
Yeah,
And
that was-
It's not one of the most offensive ones.
Right.
Yeah,
It was, and he was very clear. You know, there's no pathway to America. The pathway is back to Mexico.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of a little comedy relief, a sight gag to a certain extent. I mean, he,
For a pretty passionate.
But he was,
I think
he
he
was
I think
passionate.
yeah, but I think he did that for effect too. I think he was trying to get a charge out of
Plus,
it.
he had, I mean, how many buttons did he have on it? He had,
Yeah.
of all the candidates we've interviewed.
Oh
he
yeah,
had
the
most.
impeach Obama stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean,
for treason.
I don't think anybody really took him seriously, did we?
He did.
No.
I mean-
Our debate was between the
Wager and Joyce.
and it was probably our most spirited discussion.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I didn't like about Wager was I thought he was very patronizing to Mako. You know, I mean, I thought, you know,
Yeah.
he kept.
I did too.
I had the opposite. I
I
thought
just-
he was very respectful to him. I thought, okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the county executive race in Cuyahoga County.